The Jets lose their best pass rusher on an otherwise quiet first day of free agency. We'll break it down today. It's Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, the free agency period in 2024 is officially underway in the NFL. Yesterday was the first day of the legal tampering period. The Jets did not have a great day. Now, I don't think it's reason for panic. We're going to talk in a little bit about why we should not be panicking over a quiet first day for the New York Jets. Talk about some of the things, if you are disappointed, some of the things you should be disappointed about. But we're going to begin the show by talking about, I think, the number one disappointing part of the day. And it's not surprising. Disappointing doesn't always surprising. I think if you've been watching this closely over the last couple of months, you were expecting Bryce Huff to not return to this team. It just never felt like the Jets were super interested in bringing him back. And I was hoping against hope. You could tell it on the show if you've been listening. I've been kind of trying to will it into existence, but unfortunately it was unsuccessful. Bryce Huff leaves the New York Jets on a 3-year, $51.1 million contract with the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm really sad about this. I can't think of many times I've been sadder about the Jets losing a player for a couple of reasons. First of all, he's the best pass rusher on the team. Pass rushers are really important. Defensive ends who can get to the quarterback. They're as valuable as anything you can have in the NFL outside of quarterbacks. But it just felt to me like the Jets coaching staff and front office never really valued Bryce Huff for what he was. And I got to say, there are lots of legitimate criticisms of the Jets front office and coaching staff. Generally speaking, on the defensive side of the ball, especially on the defensive line, they've gotten things right. This is the one that I think they've just gotten completely wrong over the last couple of years. It's almost like they typecast Bryce Huff when they first took over, and they never adapted to what he showed he could do. It's almost like they just decided, this guy's nothing more than a part-time guy. He's not a guy we can count on to be anything more than a guy who plays a handful of snaps and on passing downs. And slowly, he kind of forced them to put them on the field more, but they never really adapted to it. They never really bought into it. In fact, there was a report a couple of weeks ago that the Jets never even made an offer to Huff. Now, maybe they made one over the last couple of weeks, but I'm not sure I can say that. It just never felt like this coaching staff and this front office appreciated what Huff brought to the table. It's disappointing because it goes against everything Robert Saleh has taught us about defense. He's Mr. All Gas, No Brakes. He wants speed. He wants guys who can penetrate on the defensive line. He wants guys who can make plays. And he's always valued getting to the quarterback over playing the run in his defensive lineman. And that's one of the things that drives me crazy is that it feels like with Bryce Huff, the expectations were different because you always heard why does Huff not get more playing time? Well, he's bad against the run. Yet, like every other player, they prioritize playing the pass over playing the run. It's just something I don't really understand. It's something, to me, when you have a 25-year-old who gets to the quarterback at a rate as high as anybody in the NFL as a pass rusher, it's a no-brainer you bring him back. And yet not only was it not a no-brainer for the Jets, it's like they didn't really have a lot of interest. Now, the deal Huff got, again, it was a 3-year contract. He goes to the Philadelphia Eagles, $51.1 million. So just about $17 million a year. Now, that probably sounds like a lot because, look, it's a lot. I would love to make $17 million a year. I can tell you I don't make $17 million a year. But if you look across the NFL at what edge rushers get, guys who either rush as outside linebackers, but their job is to rush the passer, or defensive ends who put their hand in the dirt, line up on the outside of the defensive line, and fire up the field to get to the quarterback. Huff's annual salary is 16th. It is half of what Nick Bosa, who's the highest paid defensive end in the league, makes. So, you look at this, you say, you know what, that's a pretty reasonable deal if you're expecting Bryce Huff to be a consistent 10-sack guy. And I am. And that's the thing is, he just had 10 sacks this season. It was the first time he ever got regular playing time in his career. He had always been a very efficient pass rusher. He'd always been a guy who could get to the quarterback. They just never really gave him a lot of playing time. I think part of the reason this resonates with me, I was thinking about this yesterday, is I wrote an article on Sunday about things, the types of players I'd like to see the Jets sign this offseason. And I mentioned, in free agency, I want to see the Jets go after guys like in their mid-20s, the guys getting their second contracts, but guys who maybe are a little undervalued in the NFL, guys who have consistently improved during their time in the NFL, but guys who maybe the rest of the league hasn't figured out yet, so that they're not going to get paid top dollar. And it was only yesterday that it occurred to me that, you know what, Bryce Huff is the perfect example of that kind of guy. It reminds me a couple of years ago when the Jets, one of their few free agent success stories, they brought in DJ Reed from Seattle, where Reed was on a pretty moderate contract. He didn't really have a great track record of success, but it kind of felt like his final year in Seattle, things started to click for him. He was in his mid-20s. Like, that's the kind of guy Huff is. And he's just going to keep getting better. And I think, over the next couple of years, now listen, you never know what's going to happen. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a guarantee that Huff's going to be a great player for Philadelphia, because you don't know. He could suffer injuries. Sometimes guys get paid. We see this all the time. Sometimes guys get paid and maybe they lose their motivation a little bit. I don't think that's going to happen with Huff, though. And when I look objectively at what I'm expecting from Bryce Huff going forward, I would say that, the next 4 to 5 years, I think it's very reasonable to say that, it's fair to expect that, a bad year, maybe he'll have 8 sacks. In a good year, he'll probably be in the teens in sacks. He's, going to a very talented Philadelphia team. I just think that the Jets let this guy get away, and they just never valued him. So, hopefully Will McDonald, who was the first round pick a year ago, hopefully he's going to be able to step into a bigger role. And that's not a guarantee. People are acting like the Jets, it's a lock that Will McDonald's going to be a great player. I mean, let me tell you something you may not know. Will McDonald's only 1 year younger than Bryce Huff. Will McDonald was an older prospect when the Jets drafted him. And, 1 year younger than Huff, and really hasn't shown anything. He really didn't earn a lot of playing time this past year. Now, listen, things can click in year 2. The Jets, to their credit, outside of Huff, have again made a lot of really good decisions. They've done a good job developing some players on the defensive line, so it can happen. But like I said, Will McDonald better be really good, because it just felt like the Jets were ignoring Huff, and it should be the most obvious thing in the world when you have a guy who has a double-digit sack season. A guy who just gets to the quarterback with the efficiency Huff does, when he has the ability to just fire off the line as lightning fast as Huff. Like in any other situation, it would be obvious you bring him back. And I see this too often with the Jets, where there's something obvious and they turn something easy into something difficult. You can say I'm biased. I don't think I'm biased. I think that my points around Bryce Huff are pretty fair. I think this is a guy who exceeded all the expectations. I'm happy for him that he got paid. Listen, he's earned this payday. Hopefully it's the kind of life-changing money that will set him and his family up for the rest of his life. I mean, $51 million, you would think. And I wish him the best in Philadelphia. I just wish we didn't get to this point. This is a guy, you get best pass rusher on your team. I think people are maybe being a little dismissive of the importance Huff had. You take your best edge rusher off the team, it's going to have an impact. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to what else happened on Monday. And the answer is not a lot. I don't think it's necessarily reason for panic, but I do think there's some reason to be concerned about what the Jets are doing. If that sounds like a contradiction, I'll try and explain it as we continue on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting for a big upset or on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And, you can bet on every game. So, again, no more busted brackets. If you're like me, there are many years where you get to like the end of the first weekend and you don't have any Final Four teams left. That FanDuel takes care of that, because now you can bet on anything. Again, point spreads, money lines. If you want to bet on who's going to win it all, you can do that too. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon. Again, it's fanduel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. New episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. We're talking about the first day of free agency in 2024. It was yesterday. I keep saying officially, unofficially, because that's the way it is. Teams are allowed to speak with free agents. So officially, the negotiations are underway, but this contracts can't be signed until tomorrow. So this weird quirk in the NFL, and it has to do with legal tampering, the whole story behind it, because the league essentially found that teams were violating the rules. So instead of punishing those teams, they changed the rules so that the teams were now in compliance by violating the rules. Yeah, that's the way the NFL thinks. Now, Jets lost Bryce Huff yesterday to the Philadelphia Eagles, and not a whole lot else happened. Jets were very quiet. And as always, and this is true like every single year, you just go online during the first day of free agency. Everybody's panicking until the Jets make their first major move. Now, the Jets did re-sign Chuck Clark on Sunday. We talked about it on yesterday's show. They signed depth corner Isaiah Oliver, but these aren't big moves. So if you were online Monday, if you're on a message board, if you were in a comment section of a website like mine, if you're on social media, you saw a lot of Jets fans panicking. And I'm going to repeat what I say every single year. And it's true. And it's been true when the Jets have spent big on the first day of free agency. It's been true on the few times the Jets have not spent big on the first day of free agency. The contracts you saw go out yesterday, most of them are going to be looked back on as disaster contracts. The reason players sign on day one, and even to an extent on day two of free agency, is that the team gives them an offer that's so ridiculous, an offer that's so outlandish, the player doesn't even feel the need to negotiate. They just say, you know what, we're taking this. His agent says, we're taking this. We can't do any better than this. These deals are so player friendly that they end up hurting the team. I am not in panic over the Jets being quiet yesterday. In fact, my bigger concern was that the Jets were going to go crazy because Joe Douglas's job is on the line. I was really worried he was going to torch a bunch of future cap space, make a bunch of splashy signings, and really damage the Jets in the future. I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised that did not happen. I'm not in panic over this. The Jets are going to sign players. There'll probably be better deals than you saw go out yesterday. Here's my concern with the Jets. And it's the old saying, every battle is won before it's fought. And the opposite's true. Battles that are lost, they're lost before they're fought. The Jets are in a really tough spot right now because they don't have a lot of cap space and they have a lot of needs. And look, they were never going to fill all their needs by spending big on the first day of free agency. That never works out. But the problem is because they have so many needs and because they have such little cap space, they're going to need to hit on an inordinate amount of their free agent signings. The free agent signings are going to come. Jets are going to make a lot of them. They're going to try and fill some of their holes in free agency with guys in like the second, third tier. And to be honest with you, that's a better strategy than trying to hit on the big name. The big spending, we've seen it over and over with the Jets. We've seen it with other teams. Get you a lot of praise in the national media, get you a lot of praise on ESPN, get you a lot of praise on NFL Network. And then in the fall, when these guys bust, everybody criticizes you and everybody forgets how much praise you got and nobody cares about it. The teams that win free agency in the long run are teams that find value players. And for the Jets, I feel like the best strategy, especially because they need 3 offensive linemen and probably 2 receivers, spread the money out, bring in lots of different guys. On the offensive line, sometimes chemistry, it trumps talent. Sometimes a line can be greater than the sum of its parts because guys work together really well. The challenge, though, is that you're not going to hit on everything. It's kind of like the draft. You're not going to hit on every draft pick. And in free agency, you're not going to hit on every signing. The problem with the Jets is they need to hit on a lot. They need to hit on almost all their signings. Jets are going to have one of the greatest off seasons in recent NFL history if they're going to build this team to be a contender. It's just not going to be easy. They're going to have to find guys under the radar who nobody else is finding right now. They put themselves in a really difficult spot. And it's kind of like the analogy I draw is it's like the end of the semester in college. Joe Douglas's job is on the line, just like your grade's on the line after you take a class. And the teams that do well in free agency, they're the teams that did the NFL equivalent of go to class all semester, do the readings, go to the office hours your professor's having. And by the time the final exam comes, they're usually in pretty good shape. These are the teams that get their signings right. These are the teams that do well in the draft. These are the teams that don't really have a lot of holes. If you enter free agency, you only have a couple, one or two key holes. You have a decent amount of cap space. Pretty reasonable to expect you're going to have a successful free agent period. The Jets, unfortunately, are the college student that like partied all semester and blew class off, and now essentially we're at the final exam, and the Jets are trying to make it work. Jets are trying to pass their final exam by like doing an all night cram session. Can it work? Yeah, I mean, occasionally you find somebody who like just runs into the right class. They get on a roll studying, but it's not a good strategy. It's not a good place to be. And that's the spot the Jets are in because they've missed on so many of their moves over the last couple of years. Some of which, were bad luck. I mean, look, I can't sit here and tell you that it's been nothing about luck, but I also don't think you can just say it's bad luck. I think the Jets have made a lot of moves that in the moment seemed like poor decisions, and some that, in hindsight, looking back, knowing what we know now, were not great decisions. You look at Joe Douglas's work at the wide receiver position. Talked about this yesterday. Lots of guys who were like pretty good fits. He's passed on the last 2 years, and he's thought that like he could outsmart everybody. That he could find some diamond in the rough in the draft, or he could find some reclamation project at receiver that the Jets could fix. Guy maybe been a little bit disappointing. Former high draft pick Mecole Hardman was one. Brashad Perryman was another. To a lesser extent, Corey Davis was one. In the draft, trying to get Denzel Mims, trying to get Elijah Moore, and there's nothing wrong with building through the draft. But Douglas has not done a great job with the moves he's made at the wide receiver position, to say nothing of the failures on the offensive line. And the failures on the offensive line are manifold, and we can go through some of the reasons, whether sometimes he just focuses too much on raw athleticism at the expense of other things. Lots of issues with the Jets along the offensive line. And the problem is like, this is like 4 or 5 years of misses at these two critical spots. The Jets did not get to this position overnight where Douglas's job's on the line, where they're on the verge of squandering, whatever chance they have with Aaron Rodgers because of the state of the offensive line and the state of the wide receiver position. This was years and years of poor decisions, years and years of things that did not work out, and a little bit of bad luck along the way. So now you're essentially trying to fix years and years of missed evaluations in one offseason. It's not easy. To me, that's the concern. The concern is not that Douglas is failing to spend ridiculous amounts of money to overpay guys who aren't that good. That's what a lot of other teams did. A lot of other teams yesterday threw out contracts that they're going to regret. You can see it already that they're going to regret these contracts because this is what happens every single year. And yeah, in the moment you get praised because your fans are fired up. It's the opposite of how Jets fans feel right now, but it's not going to work out for a lot of them. The issue with the Jets is that, if they only had like a need or two, they only needed to fill 1 or 2 spots, you'd be feeling pretty good. They need to fill, between wide receiver and the offensive line, there are 8 positions that are starters. Jets only have 3 of them filled right now, and they don't have much cap space to fill it. That's what concerns me. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to special teams because the Jets actually did. I said the Jets were quiet, which was true. They did make one significant move. It was to bring back a certain specialist, a certain popular kicker. We'll talk about that as we continue on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has a lot of benefits. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're recapping what was a pretty quiet first day of free agency for the New York Jets on Monday, but there was one signing that they made. It's a signing that I'm sure is going to be very popular in the fan base. It was a signing people were expecting for a while, and we got to Monday, and people were kind of wondering, why hasn't this happened yet? But just before the legal tampering period began, news broke that the Jets have re-signed kicker Zorline. It is a 2-year contract worth $8.4 million. And I think I'm going to speak for like 95, 96, 97, 98% of you when I say tough to argue with this one. Greg the Leg was really solid for the Jets last year, made over 90% of his kicks. He's got a big leg. He can hit it from really long. Good touchback guy, all around solid kicker, a guy who solidified the kicker position after, close to 3 years where the Jets were very inconsistent there. With, Joe Douglas's first like 2.5 years, the Jets had the worst kicking performance in the NFL. And people there are a couple of things people make mistakes about those first 2.5 years with Joe Douglas. The first is that it was Douglas's fault that Jason Myers left. Mike McCagnon let Jason Myers go to Seattle. The second is that letting Jason Myers go is why the Jets kicking got to such a poor state. Look, you should always be able to find a kicker. Greg Zuerlein, they found off the scrap heap. Now, late in 2021, Jets had Eddie Pinheiro, who at the time I always referred to as my favorite player. But Eddie lost out the kicking job to Zuerlein in 2022. And lesson for Joe Douglas. Joe Douglas kept bringing in these young guys, like these undrafted free agents with big legs, because it was almost like he was trying to solve the kicking position for the next decade. But there's always a kicker available. You don't need to solve it for 1 year. And there's always a good kicker. There's always a kicker in the NFL. If you're not good at scouting kickers, you're in luck. Or you should be in luck, because there's always a guy who's really solid with a proven track record who can go out and do a solid job for you. That's what Greg Zuerlein is. Again, this deal, 2 years, $8.4 million, so $4.2 million per year. That's not too much money. I mean, the other thing with kickers, you never want to pay kickers too much money because there's always a guy available. Again, the Jets got Greg off the scrap heap, essentially. They did not have to pay a lot to get him. Now, this is a nice raise for him, and he's earned a nice raise, and I have no problem giving him a raise as long as the money doesn't get too crazy. And this money is not too crazy. Greg, again, $4.2 million per year, not even top 10 money for a kicker. So tough to argue with this move. I think, Zuerlein's shown that he belongs in New York. He's got a long track record. You may remember back in 2018, he had a very long kick in overtime in New Orleans in the Dome to send the Rams to the Super Bowl. And it just goes back to what I said, what I've been saying for many days, many weeks on the show. If you're an everyday, you've heard me say it over and over. I have a lot of issues with the way the Jets build their roster. I think they've made a lot of mistakes over the course of the last couple of years. But one of the things I cannot argue with is the Jets focus on their special teams in their roster building. And that manifests itself in many ways. Sometimes guys at the back of the roster, you're like 46th, 47th roster spot. It goes to a guy who's a special teamer. It doesn't necessarily go to a guy who's the best backup at his position. A roster spot might go to a guy who's a special teams ace who plays across multiple units. This past year, Ashton Davis got a roster spot out of it. Irv Charles kind of bounced on the roster, he bounced between the practice squad and the roster, but got active for plenty of games because of his special teams work. If you go back to 2021, the Jets had a guy, Delshon Phillips, who was an absolute special teams ace. I like the fact that the Jets used their roster and focus on special teams. And it manifests itself in other ways as well. It manifests itself in, making sure you keep your kicker if he's willing to stay for a price. Now, if some teams out there are going to give Greg Zuerlein 3 years worth of guarantees, then you reach a point where you say, you know what, we could probably find another guy. We may have to look somewhere else. But there's no reason to get rid of Greg if Greg's willing to come back at a reasonable rate. Next up, Thomas Morstead, really solid punter for the Jets. Hey, I like him because he comes on Locked On Jets a lot. Great guy, great interview, provided so much insight. If you've ever listened to one of the shows where Thomas has come on, I never knew there was so much that went into punting. But Thomas really taught me a lot. So great shows. If you ever wanted to know like the real intricacies of punting, just look up an episode of Locked On Jets Thomas Morstead is on. Now, Rich Cimini of ESPN actually reported the other day that because of some quirk in his contract or with the salary cap, the Jets actually cannot re-sign Morstead until the new league year begins on Wednesday. So we might be in for a little bit of a wait there, but an opportunity for the New York Jets to just solidify their kicking game, focus on special teams. Again, around just about 20% of plays in the NFL are on special teams. They make a big difference. You have to remember, about half of all NFL games come down to one score or less. And special teams can make a big difference. You don't think about it, but maybe it's obvious when like there's a game-winning field goal that needs to be kicked. But sometimes flipping field position can be a big deal. Sometimes somebody making a big play in coverage can help flip a game. Sometimes it's a trick play. It's just good to have solid special teams, and I really appreciate the Jets' focus on this. Not a very eventful day for the New York Jets, but if you're looking for some silver lining, it's that Greg Zuerlein's back. Now, the other silver lines, the Jets did not sign any of these like guys the Packers cast away. There was no David Bakhtiari signing, No Marquez Valdez-Scantling, even though I guess he's coming from Kansas City technically. No Aaron Jones. Like we didn't have any like the Aaron Rodgers friend. So that's the other second silver lining. And let's hope that continues, because you're not going to have a very happy host if the Jets bring in any of these Packers guys. But you have a fairly happy host that Greg Zuerlein's back. And again, I think for me, it's very difficult of a reason to be against bringing back Greg Zuerlein, especially at the price the Jets were able to get him back on. But anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy the second day of free agency. We'll be back to talk more Jets.